So,
Am I back?
yeah, let's go back to the Cuban Missile Crisis. That's pretty cool. So your
Oh,
dad was involved with that?
He's involved in the Cuban Missile Crisis, but again, I would have been in 7th grade, more interested in baseball than us getting blown up.
Right.
So I don't really, and I'm sure it was top secret because, I don't know if you guys know what the Cuban crisis was about, but it was
Right. So they
where
thought
Russia
they
was
were
sending missiles to Cuba,
Cuba.
and
Correct.
Cuba's so close to us.
Right.
And
Right.
so it
We
had to
learned
do with
about
that.
this last year.
Okay, so you know about that.
Yeah.
And then the other was when we still were in Georgia, when a black person, Afro-American, went to, and you got to remember, I went to school at this age. They still had the black and white water fountains for the blacks down south. So that's
because you lived in
so if
Virginia.
I call it, say black, I know the correct term now is African-American.
Yeah.
And that's weird, seeing a black water fountain.
Right.
They're only black. They couldn't go to ours. But anyway, so he was setting up the communications for the Attorney General, who was also, President Kennedy was Jack Kennedy, but his son Robert was the Attorney General. I said his brother, not his son.
Okay.
His brother. And so my dad was setting up communication so he could communicate with what was going on down there. And just recently, and I don't know what made us do this, my wife and I, and we were just looking up my dad online, because so much is online now.
Right.
We found some documents on that time period.
Right.
And it said in there something about Colonel Grissard, that's my last name, Grissard, was telling us that they can't keep waiting for the Attorney General. We got to make decisions now. Kind of a little bit testy, I think.
Yeah.
So that was cool to read. Again,
So
we just went online and just Googled my dad, and then I don't think we Googled any specific event. And this whole thing of that came up.
And so, how was he involved with, the first African-American people going to school and stuff like that?
In the military, there's infantry with the guns, and my dad was more of a pacifist, and he couldn't shoot to save his life. But so he was in the Signal Corps, and Signal Corps sets up communications.
Right.
Telephones nowadays, but whatever. So it would be to set up all the communications so that whoever's involved down at point A can communicate with the powers to be at point B.
Right.
And in this case, Robert Kennedy. So my dad, I don't think, interacted directly with him, but he was involved in setting up, making sure they could communicate.
Right. And why were they needing to communicate?
Oh, because it was a big deal. They had the National Guard there, I think, or maybe regular service. I don't know. But for the riots and everything.
That's cool.
Yeah.
And was your dad ever involved in combat or anything like that, or?
Well, he was in World War II, and but all he had was this what they call a sidearm pistol, because he wasn't involved in as infantry or artillery, because his job. So he was in combat in the sense he'd be in the war zones, but not directly fighting.
Okay.
But like I said, and I have some awesome pictures because my mom and dad were in the war together.
That's cool.
And to watch them throughout the war for 4 years. I don't know how they kept getting stationed together, but they did.
And what was your mom doing?
Army nurse.
Wow, that's
and
awesome.
She was a lieutenant. I think she outranked my dad even. But,
wow, that's pretty cool.
Even after she retired, she probably outranked him in the marriage. But and then my mom got hurt in the war.
How was she hurt?
She was in a Jeep, and her arm got sideswiped by another American vehicle, so it wasn't an enemy thing, but it took off. So she had to go be in a hospital for a long time. They had to skin graft it. And the few stories I remember, one story I remember that they told, my dad would go visit her in the Jeep at the hospital, and then I think his Jeep got stolen one night.
Oh, no.
So, just like you hear about in the movies, the old MASH movies and stuff. So, but to see the pictures of them together, it's in that time period and in that situation, is pretty pretty cool.
That is cool.
Yeah.
Yeah. And so how is, like, do you remember any stories about World War II that they talked about or not in
No,
particular?
they didn't. I wished, in hindsight, and I can recommend it to you and everybody else, especially nowadays, I'm just kicking myself for not. My dad died suddenly, so I couldn't do that. But my mom lived with me here last year. She died at 93. I wish we had interviewed her.
Yeah.
On like you're doing.
Right.
Because she had stories out the wazoo.
Yeah.
And I mentioned how everybody liked my dad, but everybody loved my mom too. I mean, it was just amazing. She was the neatest lady.
Yeah.
And she could have. Yeah, I highly recommend interviewing your parents.
Right.
Find out what they did.
Cool.
Because it's they have a story.
And so earlier you mentioned that your dad was involved with the first African Americans going to school. So like, do you remember what it was like with the segregation? Like, how did you feel about that? And
I don't, and here's why. In the military, I mean, I know there was some, but not like. I mean, I'm sure, I don't know what you call it, but there wasn't segregation in the sense of black and white water fountains.
Right.
Separate schools. Blacks went to the same school we did. So again, at that age, when you're more interested in girls and sports and stuff, at least that for me, and maybe that's, I don't know what, but so I don't. And we were only there for 1 year in Georgia before we moved to Italy. So I don't know. I mean, I remember thinking it was weird seeing a black water fountain where African Americans had to drink. And I think even then it was still, but again, I rode on a military school bus, so we didn't have that. But they would have to ride in the back of the bus. And I'm sure you guys have studied all that in history. So you know all that, maybe better than I do. But I don't have stories other than that being weird. But again,
it's just like it just didn't
because when we went to Italy, and it said they're from all over the world going to school there.
It didn't make a lot of sense.
No. And then at the younger age, we'd be in the U.S. up in Virginia, but in Taiwan, it was an American, all kids from military families.
And do you remember a lot about being in Virginia? Because I know that you segregated there.
Boy, I didn't. You don't notice it as much, or I didn't. My dad was at the Pentagon 3 of the times. Nothing stands out other than just what you'd normally go through growing up. Just nothing. I don't recall any events like the missile crisis or that. The others thing, the school event. So, so I'm not even sure what my dad did at the Pentagon. But
do you remember current events about that sort of thing, or like not at all? Like you remember the Cuban Missile Crisis, but like what about like in relation
well, before
to
that, and then of course Vietnam was going on during that period too. The later period. Didn't think much about that till my brother got sent over there. And then until I became of age where they could draft you. But it went on for quite a while, and I don't know how much we heard about it at first until we got really involved. And I would have been probably a junior in high school, and then of course in college is when I was in college, which would have been 67 to 72 is when you really heard about Vietnam and all the protests. And even on my campus, one of the buildings got burned down. Of course,
really? What was that about?
A protest, for Vietnam. And of course, Kent State, a couple kids were killed, shot. There was protests going on all over. So.
Were you ever involved in any of that, or not really?
No, I wasn't. And again, a couple reasons, I think. I was just trying to sort out my feelings, but when my brother was killed, that was really traumatic. And it did a lot of change, because just for background, my dad died about a year and a half right prior to that. So it was kind of bam, bam. So I think I was just dealing with life. and at college, and I also I played on the college tennis team too. So just those type of things. So just going to think about it, that's still a young age. So I think so I didn't get into the protests for that reason, and the other reason was, like I said, I was involved in the school tennis. So.
Right.
I'm not sure what I would do now.
Yeah.
Because I definitely was against it. But I've changed a lot since then, so I don't know if I'd be more active or not.
Right. And what did, like, your dad and your brother dying, like, how did that affect you?
When my dad died, he died first. Again, I was a sophomore in college. And that was hard because, of course, my mom was home with 2 kids, my 2 brothers, younger brothers. And she would call me a lot, and I think want me to come home and things like that. And I actually went home one summer, the summer after he passed away, so that would have been between sophomore and junior year. And I didn't care for New Jersey. I loved Colorado.
Right.
And I went home, and after about a week, I went to where my mom was working, told her I was leaving, and walked away. Turned around. Back in those days, gas was 25 cents a gallon.
Yeah.
And I could drive all the way to Colorado and whatever with $100 in my pocket. And I got a job as soon as I got to Colorado. Stayed with friends, and that was hard because I'd hurt my mom. But it's at some point, I felt strongly. I had a life too.
Right.
And whatnot. And then and I think I was pretty down. I know I was down in the dumps.
Yeah.
Whatever you want to call it.
Yeah.
Then when my brother was killed, almost the same time of year, all right around Thanksgiving, and my dad was right around Christmas, then it almost like snapped me out of whatever, that funk.
Yeah.
Depression, whatever.
Right.
And kind of went a different path.
Right.
So.
Do you remember hearing about your brother dying?
Yeah, my mom. I remember exactly. We lived in this apartment complex, and mine was on one end. But anyway, I was down at the other end at a friend's house watching football.
Right.
And we didn't have cell phones back then, and or computers. And my roommate called me and said, "You got to call home." And so I did, and my mom told me he'd been killed.
Right.
So I went out. I just had to walk, and there's a blizzard out.
Yeah.
And just walked. And friend drove by and saw me and picked me up. And then I flew home that night.
Yeah.
They're both in Arlington Cemetery.
Yeah.
Now my mom is too, so they're all 3 there. My brother and my mom and dad.
Cool. Wow. So. And how did your brother die? Okay.
He was a helicopter pilot. He got every award you can get, just about, because he took his helicopter down and drew fire from this other helicopters being fired upon. He drew the fire, and his got hit and blew up.
Wow.
So, and my dad died of a heart thing.
Right. And so, like, what sorts of, did you have to go to any ceremonies for your brother, like military sorts of things?
Yeah, they're like in Arlington, so they both had the military funeral, which is tear-jerking in and of itself, the 21-gun salute, the folding of the flag. I'm sure everybody's seen that on TV and movies and whatnot. So it's taps.
Right.
It's a tear-jerker, just even if you don't know the person.
Right. And, like, what sorts of, like, awards and stuff like that?
Oh, sure, the Purple Heart, and I don't know the names of them, but, the different Medal of Honors, for what he did.
Right. And do you think that your dad being in the military influenced your brother's choice to go into the military, or was it more of just his own path? Well,
it could have been the era that was in, because if you didn't go to college, you would have been drafted.
Right.
I didn't go because I was in college. And then again, they don't have that now, I don't think, the draft. No, they don't. but we had the draft. We had the first draft, and I remember sitting in. We all huddled in one room, and it was like bingo. Only you didn't want to win. You wanted the last number possible. So I had a very high number, 325 out of 365. So chances of me getting drafted, even if I wasn't in school, would have been slim.
Yeah.
And
but your brother was drafted, or
no, he signed up. That's how he got, because he wanted to do the helicopters, but he quit college. He wasn't into that kind of thing.
Mm-hmm.
I'll be honest with you, he flunked out of college, I think. Yeah. But he ended up, because he found something he wanted to do, he was #1 in his helicopter training program. Wow. And then he was over in Vietnam, and my dad died, so they sent him home early. Mm-hmm. And then he became an instructor for helicopter pilots, but then he put in to go back over, and I'm not sure why.
Yeah.
But he did. And this time didn't come back.
Right.
So,
yeah. Okay.
Those were a tough time for my mom.
Yeah,
I don't know how my mom survived. I mean, hard enough for us, but you can imagine a mom losing her husband, but then her son too.
Yeah, that can be.
Yeah, I can't even imagine.
Right.
That's like.
Right.
But she was a trooper.
Yeah. And you were also around during the time of like 9/11 and stuff like that.
Mm-hmm.
Do you remember those days?
Oh yeah, I remember a lot about that.
Yeah.
I was at Shriners working.
Right.
For in a clinic there when the towers got hit, and again, I don't think people knew what was going on at first.
Right.
But then we did. I became very scared, like I assume most people did, because then following that was that anthrax thing. Do you know what that is? Where somebody was mailing out that poison powder or whatever it is. And I remember being so nervous. I was looking at my mail wondering.
Yeah.
So it was pretty scary times, easy to get withdraw, I guess you could say. But I decided, and you think, oh, this is going to be the end of the world. But I was pretty lucky because I'm working at Shriners, and we see kids from all over the world, actually, a lot from Mexico and the U.S. But I decided to focus on that. Mm-hmm. And it's amazing. And kind of to go back a little bit, you asked about when I volunteered in other countries and stuff. This kind of relates to that. When you get to go to these places and meet other people and maybe other professions, but especially healthcare, I think, for me, since that's all I know, is how great people are.
Yeah.
All you hear is about the bad.
Right.
And it gave me this faith and the strength during 9/11 to know that the sky wasn't all just falling in.
Yeah.
I can't even describe. There's so many great people out there that want the same things we do. Families, they're family oriented. They want the best things that you can get for their kids, which is why they would travel for days and days and days and sleep outside to be seen by a doctor, hoping that they can make their kid better. So even though there's a lot of bad stuff like 9/11, there's, I think, still way more good.
Right.
And I think you see it here when there's disasters.
Mm-hmm.
You know, the floods that we get and the different things, how people all rally around to help. So I think that's what I focused on, that instead of the 9/11 stuff.
Right.
Because I needed something to not get withdraw, I guess you'd say.
Right.
Or think the world was coming to an end.
Yeah, and do you still think about that today with like all the shootings that have been happening recently?
Yep. Yeah. Well, yeah, you could go a different path thinking about that too.
Right.
But with a lot of the other disasters, I still say there's more good people than bad people.
Right. Good. Yeah. And I think I remembered you telling me once that you were in plays when you were growing up and like in college and stuff.
Well, I would have lied to you if I did.
Oh.
I was too shy. I was in sports. Like I said, I played.
Somebody was telling me that they were tights or something like that for plays. Was that you or no?
Not for plays. We did for Halloween and whatnot.
Oh, never mind then.
I always won a lot of Halloween contests at Shriners with my buddy Ken.
Fun.
And your dad even.
Yeah.
I don't know if he's ever told you about this. One thing we did your dad and Ken and I, we had a above ground swimming pool at Shriners for therapy, and we did the synchronized swimming, us three guys.
You did?
Yeah, we had these funny little hats on. And it's on video somewhere if your dad still has it.
I would love to see that.
Well, I can show it to you if you have a video thing. I'm sure your dad doesn't have it.
That'd be awesome. Okay, so what about, like, who were you first married to?
Well,
tell me about Katie.
Katie, we lived together quite a while, and then we were married. We never had kids, even though we tried. She was a nurse.
Yeah.
Amazing person. She could light up a room. And but she passed away 10 years ago in November from ALS, which is Lou Gehrig's disease. So that was hard, another hard time in life. And you knew her somewhat. You were pretty young, but she was just a sweetheart.
She was awesome.
She lived quite a full life too for all those. I mean, to die, she was 52 when she passed away. Still think about her a lot.
Yeah.
And I just told Bryn this morning, my latest grandbaby was born on the day that Katie passed away. So that's
And do you remember her photographs and stuff like that?
Yeah, I gave you one today for Christmas.
Yeah.
She was a nurse, but she also had a business of making cards with her photography. She was into photography.
Yeah.
So this morning for Bryn and her sister Colleen, we had one of our dog with the antlers on and the Christmas hat.
Was that McKinley? Or?
That was McKinley.
Yeah.
So that's what I gave them for their Christmas cards today.
Tell me about Sheila now.
And then several years later, I met, after Katie passed away, I met another nurse via a friend. I never went online. I never did the dating online thing.
Yeah. But
it took me a few years because, first of all, ALS is a nasty illness.
Yeah.
It's a slow death. And even though I'm nowhere near what Katie went through, it's still hard for a caregiver.
Right.
She went through depression, which is all part of it, really bad depression. And people, your mom included, trying to set me up with people. I won't say, oh yeah, you don't go to that school anymore, but your principal, she tried to set me up with.
Oh my gosh, she tried to set you up with Betsy Hunt? Oh, we do not like that woman. I don't know why she decided to set you up
it was
with
pretty
her.
soon after Katie passed away, and
Goodness.
I felt there was no way, and the reason is, and other people did too, but I figured, if you're not happy with yourself, you can't be in a relationship, and you can't give.
Right.
And I just needed to get back to who I was and feel good inside, and that took me about 2.5 years.
Yeah.
And I knew when I was ready to start dating again, I could feel it inside.
Yeah.
And somebody, they gave me her phone number, but Sheila, who I'm married to now.
Yeah.
And I called her, and she was very unique because I'm very particular.
Yeah.
I didn't need to be with anybody. I'm happy with my life.
Right.
And turns out she has a very interesting life. And you could have done this interview with her. I think she grew up in an orphanage.
Right, and we were just talking about the whole.
Yeah, that whole thing. Yeah, there's all kinds of stories that she has,
Crazy.
good and bad.
Yeah.
But she's talk about medical missions.
Right.
She has been on months and months of them as a nurse.
Right, and she just went to.
She got back this summer from Guatemala, where they had the volcano. She was one of the first responders to Puerto Rico to set up clinics. But she used to do a lot with Project Hope, and they would go on the Navy ship. I don't know if you've seen them, the white with the big white cross on them.
Right.
There's 2 of them.
Cool.
She'd go for a couple months at a time, and she would be in places I can't even pronounce, but like Timor and all over. And so she's still into that, and we'd like to do one together.
Right, that would be cool.
But I'm not, nurses are needed more than what I do, especially in first response.
Right, that makes sense.
Type of teams, but and she has the 2 kids that have the grandkids. So between the 2 of her kids, and they live in Bountiful. So between them, her daughter has 2, and her son has 1.
Right, and what are their names?
Abigail is 2, Bridger is 14 months, and Reagan is just 2 months, or not even 2 months.
Fun.
So life is interesting.
Yeah.
And even though you go through some really, really tough times, there's still, like I keep saying, a lot of good in life, and you can still be productive and hopefully find somebody that you can be productive with.
Yeah. And would you mind telling me real fast about Sheila's orphanage thing? Because I thought that was super cool. Or not cool or good, but I thought that was interesting.
The recent thing?
Yeah, the recent stuff.
Well, I can tell you about it. I don't know how much people follow it or how, but I guess lately, I mean, you can't even pick up a paper without seeing with the Catholic Church right now. It was a Catholic orphanage in Vermont, and she was, I think, because she was back in those days, she was from a poor family and they had 9 kids. So 2 or 3 of them were put in the orphanage. Her oldest brother ran away, so he never got put in one. And the youngest, that wanted to stay with us for Christmas, he was in a foster home.
Yeah.
But her and her sister were put in there, and she was there from about 4 to 14 years old, and then they have to leave. And, so anyway, what Bryn's asking me is recently, I mean, you read about all the abuse that's gone on in the church, but that's nothing new, sadly, and it's not unique to the United States. It's actually worldwide.
Right.
Because I looked on a website to look up her orphanage, St. Joseph's, and read this, whatever you call it, information on it, thinking it was hers, and it turned out to be one in Europe somewhere.
Right.
But in her case, there's somebody from, I forget her name, from I think New Zealand or Australia, who's came to the U.S. to do, well, she's done it worldwide, but this author looking into orphanages and the abuse that was done. And so she picked Sheila's. So she actually flew out here to interview Sheila. And the article recently got published in BuzzFeed, which I guess is an internet newspaper. And it's created quite a stir in Vermont, where and particularly Burlington, where Sheila's orphanage was. Because in theory, even, and I don't know, again, it's hard to tell what, I know most of it's true, but there's even a claim that the nuns had murdered some people, and I'm not sure how true that is, but I know the abuse was true because I've been to the orphanage. It's closed down, but I've seen the writing on the wall and things like that. But
what sorts of things were written on the walls?
Oh, how can people that believe in Christ be so mean and cruel? And because we got invited there just a couple of years ago, before they were going to convert it into townhouses and apartments.
They didn't preserve it to
Not in that regard.
No. Okay.
So you see all the, and then we met some of the people too, of course, that came back for that to take the tour of it. But because of what's gone on, I think that came out about 3 months ago, maybe 4. The Attorney General from Vermont has called Sheila to ask her questions, and the police department called her. I don't know what all they talked about, but and then this many years later, there's nothing that could or would be done.
Right.
But, so I don't know where they're going with it.
But basically there was abuse in her.
Yeah, and it's really hard to understand. Again, like what people wrote on, how can people that are supposedly a part of Christ and religion, or even if you're just a human being, how can you be so cruel? And I'll give you one example I do know about. and it was in the article too, if you ever go back. It's St. Joseph's orphanage, but you can read about it. But the nuns would make the kids eat their own puke, for example. And I asked Sheila if she ever had to. She said no, but I had to feed it to some of them. And so just grotesque stuff that isn't even humane. No. How can you? Right. You know, it's just mind-boggling. But again, you can pick up the paper and read about it any day of the week there. So
that makes sense.
It's I don't want to go into all of that in this kind of an interview. But,
no.
But and Sheila tries to look at the beauty of her. She always tries to look at the positive things. And
right.
And it's mostly negative, but she does see some positive there. I don't know what.
Right. Okay. And do you remember like any sorts of like movements growing up, like the gay rights movement and women's and stuff like that, or not really?
No, because back when that's all pretty much happened since I've been in my late adulthood.
Right.
I mean, trying to think if there were probably gay people even in my school, but I don't even know if we knew what that word was, to be honest with you, back then.
But
because we're talking 60 years ago.
Yeah.
I'm 69 now, so 9 to maybe 17 years old. Even in college, I'm not sure when that really became. AIDS maybe is what really brought that more and more to the forefront, I would think. I forget when that was, the late 70s, or during the 70s and 80s.
But like in terms of women's rights stuff, it seemed like
women's rights.
It seems like your mom was pretty, like would you say that your mom and your dad had like a fairly equal relationship? Yeah.
Although my mom still did say she stayed home, because again we eventually had the four of us, even though, like I said, by the time the one is 10 years younger than me, so we're so far apart we didn't grow up together.
Yeah.
When you think about it. So she was a stay-at-home mom until my dad passed away. Then she got back into nursing to make money.
Yeah.
That's what a lot of women did back then. Anyway, stayed home.
Right.
And that's a full-time job.
No.
It's probably better if you could have gone to work and have to be home with 3 boys.
Right.
So no, I guess not, because I think they got the women, and I would have been too young. I forget when women got the right to vote. Even.
Right.
Do you remember? No, but
early 1900s.
Was it before? Yeah, so it was before I was born.
Yeah, I think so.
And I did, like I said, I don't even know. We didn't ever discuss politics at home.
Right.
I know nowadays, and a lot of families do, but we didn't.
Yeah. But would you say that your dad like respected your mom?
Oh yeah.
Yeah.
Oh yeah, I'd say it was an equal, relationship. But again, they were both really neat in their unique ways.
Right.
But for example, my dad was an officer, a lieutenant colonel. And like I said, in Georgia, he had his own battalion. I mean, he was the commander of all, I don't know how many people.
Pretty cool.
And I'll never forget, and I still tell this story to people, when we went to some parade, and they had bleachers, and the enlisted men were offering us their seats, and my dad wouldn't take them. So I think he was equal with everybody, but for sure, I don't recall any. I think that, I mean, I'm sure like they had their spats. They didn't really fight in front of us.
Right.
But you can't be in a relationship like this and with 4 boys and moving all the time, and because that moving would be tough on my mom, especially when we moved to Georgia, because she had to do it by herself because my dad went on maneuvers.
Right.
And that's got to be hard on her. So I think they made their decisions jointly, for family stuff.
Right. Cool. And do you know, like, your heritage, like, what not nationality, but...
Well, I think we're French and German.
Right, and Grizzard is...
French,
right?
But my mom's maiden name was Rosenberger, and my grandmother's maiden name was Fretsch, which are both German.
Those are very German, yeah.
Yeah, so, and my dad grew up with 9 in his family.
Yeah.
and they were close. They were some of my favorite. And my mom had 2 sisters.
Yeah. Cool.
They were all very great, very good people. Yeah.
So, like, do you know any, like, history about your family name or not really?
Not really. I started to look it up once. This is a kitty cat.
Yeah.
Hey, kitty. But I can't remember all the details. Something about the Huguenots and the whatever, but I don't. Not enough that I could really tell you about.
Yeah. And do you like know like how your family like came to the United States and stuff? Or not really?
And I'm trying to. Those are all things I highly recommend going back and reading, because I don't know if they were first generation. Here, you know, in other words, with my grandparents that came, or their grandparents.
Right. Okay.
Yeah, I can't recall.
Cool. But you only sort of speak Spanish, right? But do you speak any other languages?
Only one sentence in Chinese.
Only one sentence in Chinese.
Ni hao ma. How are you?
Cool.
No. And in Italy, I had to take French because the classes in Italian were too busy, but never spoke it. So.
Oh, cat, please don't pause it or delete anything. Oh dear. Okay.
That's still going.
Yeah. Okay, good. Let's see.
But you know, in terms of regret, I have I have a few, not too many, but one is that I didn't interview my mom.
Right. Do you have any ways to remember her besides that? Like any pictures?
I have pictures for sure. And I'm going to put what I'm working on now. I told you all the ones of her and my dad during the war. I mean, those are unique.
That would be so cool to see.
So I'm putting, of course they're all black and white.
Right.
And my dad even has pictures because of, he didn't take them, but being in the Signal Corps, he knew people involved. But we have some of the bombings, the Hiroshima or Nagasaki, the atomic bomb. I have some pictures of that. The aftermath.
That's crazy.
It's crazy. Yeah.
That's awesome.
And
that would be really
a few
cool
other pictures, but yeah.
Yeah. Do you think that being in the war like had an emotional toll on either of your parents, or? You
know, like I said, I never went to the Vietnam War.
Right.
So I've never been in war, but I know it does. From my brother and my sister-in-law telling me about my brother when he came back from Vietnam. He had a really, really difficult time. But World War II, you know, was more of a national thing. Yeah. Vietnam, you guys weren't around, but again, all the protests and everything else, it was really a divided thing. I don't know that there was a division during World War II.
Right.
It was the right thing to do. They both volunteered. I'm sure it's something that if you haven't been, like me, you can't even imagine the horrors of it. But if they were affected, I didn't see it in terms of their emotion stuff.
Right.
You know, that I know some people have come, even now we're dealing with it, to come back from Afghanistan and Iraq and places, and with what's now the post-traumatic stress stuff. PTSD, but I don't think my parents had any of that. And it could have been because it was a different war. I don't know.
Well, that's good that they weren't.
Yeah, it didn't show if they did.
That's good.
And again, it involved the majority of our country versus just a few that go nowadays.
Yeah. And you mentioned that your mom had stories of the wazoo, and like, do you remember any of them?
Of the what?
Like any stories that your mom would tell you, or?
No. Well, let's see. She's the one who told me about my dad's Jeep getting stolen, and again, you have to watch the movie MASH, which is way old to understand, because even in that, the guy's Jeep got stolen, so it's not just a movie thing.
Yeah.
It actually happened to my dad.
Yeah, that's funny.
And no, I can't. That's the part I regret. I wish I could have recorded some and remembered some, or had more interest, but she kept up with several. They would have a reunion every year for several years till they got too old, and of course now maybe all of them are gone. I don't know.
Yeah. Well,
they get together. No. would have been a bunch of Army nurses.
Yeah. That's cool.
Which is all male at that time, female at that time.
Right. Huh.
The wax, well, not the wax, the nurses. And but I will say this: I've looked at. There's a couple books. I mean, all you hear, or mainly what you hear. I think they have now a statue in D.C. Honoring the women too, because I think it's minimized what they did in World War. Well, any war, but World War II.
Right.
And there's one book, and I never read it, but I have it. I got it from my mom about the women that got trapped in, I think, Japan.
Right.
And their whole story. So, unfortunately, I think it's been minimized what they did. And, but I'm pretty sure, and I can't remember if it's the Army Nurse Corps or the WAC, the Women's Army Corps.
Yeah.
That has a statue now, and also memorial in DC, Washington, D.C. If you haven't been to the Vietnam Memorial, I've been there a couple times. It's just a wall with all their names, but it's just the most, you can't help but be emotionally drawn into it.
Right.
It's pretty amazing.
Yeah. What's your brother's name?
And my brother's on it,
Wow. That's cool.
Yeah.
Have you found his name on there? Cool.
When I was there, we went there when we buried my mom in Arlington. And so my brother that was killed in Vietnam, he had a son who never knew his dad. And his name's John also. And so we're still in touch. And he came, so he was there, and my other brother was there. And I think it got deleted off my phone, but his son, my younger brother's son, took a picture of my brother's name. And just by chance, me and my younger brother were in the reflection. Yeah. That was a pretty cool picture.
That was a cool picture.
Yeah, reflection off the wall.
Wow.
With my brother's name on there. So yeah, I guess lots happened in 69 years.
Yeah.
The computer stuff.
Yeah.
And being able to, people nowadays don't know what a payphone is, I don't think, or a dial phone.
I know what they are,
okay.
But I know that a lot of my friends
would you be able to use it?
Maybe. I think maybe I could figure it out.
Yeah. So anyway.
Yeah. Is there anything else that you think would be like significant for AP US history? Good story to tell?
No, and again, I told Bryn ahead of time, there's some I can't tell because when you're, I don't know if you've ever heard the term military brat.
Yeah.
Have you?
Yeah, I have.
Yeah, I think the fun opportunities just present themselves. So we were always getting mischief. I wouldn't call it trouble.
I didn't understand the brat part.
I don't know what they get now, but that's just what they would say. I don't know if it's because we had so many opportunities back then, and it was minor trouble compared to maybe some of the things you can do now. To my knowledge, drugs weren't a thing back then. Maybe they were, but I can't think of anybody that, I think if you had a beer, you were lucky, or not lucky, but living on the edge.
Yeah.
Because marijuana, to my knowledge, didn't even exist in my until college and stuff. So, we did pranks, I guess is a good word. Yeah. A lot of different pranks that you could do.
Is there any that you can tell me about, or not school appropriate?
I can't think of any that would, it'd be out of context and everything. So, but I one of my, I told you, a guy we knew in Taiwan. He called the other day, and I just found out how he got to the U.S. He just told me how he ended up, and he married an American, and he's lived here for years and years. But you probably won't remember this movie either. The Sand Pebbles. It's a movie with Steve McQueen, who was a famous actor at the time, and he's long gone. And this guy's name he gave himself an American name, Jimmy Yang. Yeah. So I don't remember what his Chinese first name was. Because I was only second through fourth grade.
Right.
And but he was telling me the other day on the phone how he got to the United States, because he ended up going to Auburn, which is I think in Georgia, but he was the interpreter. They filmed that movie in Taiwan, a lot of it.
Mm-hmm.
So he was the interpreter for that movie and another one that I can't remember the name. But he met some of the actors. So Gregory Peck also, but wrote him a letter. He and the director, and I forget who the director was, wrote him letters, and that's how he said he got into Auburn and got kind of, and again, back then things were different.
Mm-hmm.
And so he was able to get a passport and papers a lot easier than you can.
Right.
Now, again, because of all the things going on, you can't get that as easy. But anyway, so they evidently wrote him a letter. And so Gregory Peck was a famous actor.
Cool. That's pretty neat.
And so, so he's, and again, he tells me stories about, that I don't remember. He said his dad was a doctor in Taiwan, and that he invited us to their house for his birthday, not his dad's, but his birthday, Jimmy's birthday. His dad's clinic was, I remember this, was down below, and we had to go upstairs. But he said it's one of the first times they've gotten presents and everything from my parents giving gifts and stuff. So, so I'm looking for, what I'd really love to do is go back to Taiwan with him so he could show us places that we actually went.
Yeah, that would be cool.
Yeah, because I don't remember the majority of it.
Right. But you travel a lot, so where have you been?
Well, like I said, as a kid, Taiwan, Virginia, I have to do it in sequence. Virginia, then we moved to Hawaii, and it wasn't a state back then, Hawaii.
Yeah.
That's how old I am.
Was it fun living in Hawaii?
Well, I was only a brand new baby.
Oh, okay.
And we left when I was 2.5, so I don't remember.
Hey, Opus.
You want to fight? And
I can't tell if he's in a playful mood or just being mean.
And then, then from Hawaii to Virginia, Virginia to Taiwan, Taiwan to back to Virginia, Georgia, Italy, New Jersey. Then as an adult, I've been to Mexico many times, some for work, some for play, medical. Well, I've been invited. I lectured in Argentina.
Right.
I rafted the Bio for 9 days in Chile. Then went down into Patagonia, backpacked into there. I backpacked up in the Brooks Range, which is in the Arctic Circle in Alaska, for 2 weeks. Where else have we been?
All over the United States.
All over the U.S., yeah. There's still a few states I haven't been in, though.
Yeah.
But been in definitely the majority, either traveling through or visiting.
Right.
But there's still a lot in the U.S. even that we plan on seeing and doing.
Cool.
Yeah. So it's been a very interesting life.
Yeah.
And now, of course, Bryn being my goddaughter, watching her grow up from a baby, and her sister Colleen, who may be swimming for Skyline soon.
Yeah.
We hope.
It'll be fun. Yeah.
So,
all right.
yeah, it's been great.
Yeah. Okay.